I'd like to take that one for a drive.
I'm sorry, sir, this isn't really a casual test drive kind of vehicle.
See what this place really is.
That's him. That's actually him.
You decided in 90 seconds that I wasn't worth basic courtesy.
Mr. Voss, before you decide anything, there's something you don't have on that footage.
The smell hit him first. Leather, the kind that costs more per square foot than the carpet in most people's homes. Conditioned air drifted out through the automatic glass doors of Sterling Royal Motors as they parted for him like they didn't want to. He stood on the threshold a moment. Dust on his boots, real dust, ground into the seams of leather after 30 years of walking fields before sunrise. His jeans were faded at the knees, soft the way fabric gets when it's washed 1,000 times and never once for show. His shirt was buttoned wrong by one hole, like he'd dressed in a hurry or simply didn't care. Maybe 65, could have been 70. The kind of 65 that comes from real weather and real work, not gym memberships and dermatologists. He looked by every visual cue the showroom floor was built to measure, like a man who did not belong. That was the point. He'd done this enough times now to know exactly how the first 30 seconds would go before he ever stepped through the door. The calculation people make without realizing they're making it. The way eyes drop to shoes before they ever reach a face. He'd built an entire company on the idea that customer experience was the product, not the car, and somewhere along the way that idea had stopped being tested by the people responsible for living it. So he tested it himself. Old jeans, work boots, a shirt buttoned wrong, his hands rough enough from actual labor years ago before any of this. Before the garage became a company, that nobody ever questioned whether the calluses were real. Behind the reception desk, a young woman glanced up, ran the fast unconscious calculation, asterisk clothes, watch, posture, keys in hand or not, and looked back down without a word. Across the floor, under track lighting angled to make six-figure paint jobs glow like museum pieces. Two men in dark suits stood near a matte black coupe priced longer than most people's annual salary. One was Russell Kane, general manager 44, a man who'd spent 6 years believing his ability to read a customer's net worth on sight was a kind of genius. The other was Trent Ashford, top salesman 3 years running, tan that didn't come from farm work, watch worth more than the tractor the old man parked at home. Russell saw him first. "Oh, for," he muttered, not quite quiet enough, "Trent." "Look at this." Trent turned, took in the boots, the jeans, the crooked button, and produced the smile salespeople save for people they've already decided not to sell to. Practiced, hollow underneath. The old man crossed the floor unhurried, the way people move when they've walked long distances over uneven ground and have no patience left for pretending to be in a hurry. He stopped near the centerpiece, a deep red sports car, low and sharp-edged, the kind of machine that looked like it was breaking the speed limit while sitting still. The placard read a price that could buy 4 houses in most counties. "Afternoon," he said, voice low, carrying the gravel of decades outdoors. "I'd like to take that one for a drive." Trent laughed, a short, surprised exhale, like the old man had told a joke he hadn't meant to be funny. "I'm sorry, sir," Trent said, sliding into something condescending and polite at once. "This car retails north of 300,000. "It's not really," he gestured at the boots, the jeans, all of it. "A casual test drive kind of vehicle. We've got a nice selection of certified pre-owned sedans 2 lots over. I could call you a cab if you'd like." The old man didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, and from men with a fraction of Trent's manners. "I didn't ask about the sedans." Russell stepped in, asserting managerial authority over what he'd already filed as a lost tourist or a man who'd wandered off the wrong bus. "Sir, I run this dealership, and for insurance purposes we require proof of funds before a test drive of flagship inventory. A pre-approval letter, bank statement." It wasn't true. It was a policy invented on the spot, corporate speak for slamming a door and calling it protocol. The old man knew it wasn't true. He'd built the company that printed the handbook neither of these men had apparently opened in 2 years. "I don't carry that kind of paperwork in my pocket," he said simply. "Then I'm afraid there's nothing I can do for you." Russell was already turning his shoulder, already filing the interaction closed. "Have a good day." The old man looked at him a long moment, not angry, almost curious, the way a man studies a once promising field gone to weed. Then he nodded and turned for the door. That's when Daniela Ruiz noticed him. 23, 4 months into the service intake department, mid-walkthrough with a customer's trade-in across the floor. Showroom sales traffic wasn't her department. And everyone understood. In the unspoken way, employees learn the real rules under the official ones, that crossing the line without permission could earn you a write-up. But she saw his face. Not embarrassment. Something quieter, the dignity of someone absorbing one more small cruelty and simply deciding not to let it land. She crossed the floor before she'd fully decided to. "Sir, can I get you a water before you head out? It's hot today." He stopped. Looked at her properly, the way people do when they're used to being looked past. "That's kind of you, I'm all right." "You sure?" She lowered her voice. "I can pull the spec sheet on that car if you're curious, even if they won't let you drive it." Corporate sometimes runs financing promotions the floor staff don't mention up front. It was a small thing, a water bottle and an offer. It wouldn't have made the news if he'd been exactly what he appeared, a retired farmer with no money and no reason to be remembered. But it cost her nothing to offer and everything to mean, and in a building full of people pricing him by his shoelaces. She was the only one who'd simply seen a tired old man and decided he deserved basic decency. "What's your name?" "Daniela." He repeated it like he was filing it away somewhere permanent. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a plain white envelope sealed blank. "I need you to do something for me," he said quietly. "Don't open this. Give it to your general manager, Russell, is it? But only when he's alone, not in front of customers." "Not in front of Trent." She frowned, turning it over. Heavier than paper should be, though there was nothing inside but a folded letter. "Is everything okay? Everything's about to be very clear." Something shifted in his voice, not threat. Just the calm certainty of a man who already knows how a story ends because he's the one writing it. "Thank you for the water offer, Daniela. I won't forget it." He walked back across the floor past Russell and Trent without a glance, through the glass doors into the afternoon heat, leaving nothing behind but dust on the tile and an envelope about to detonate quietly in the middle of Russell Kane's career. Daniela waited until Russell finished a call, 40 minutes, during which she nearly talked herself out of it twice before knocking. "Yeah, what?" "This is for you." From the man who wanted to test drive the Velocity, he said to give it to you alone. "The homeless guy?" "He wasn't homeless," she said, sharper than intended, and left before he could respond. Russell stared at the envelope, half expecting a complaint letter. The kind, disgruntled walk-ins occasionally left, empty Yelp threats that never amounted to anything. He almost tossed it in the recycling bin. Instead, bored, irritated, certain this was the 101st nuisance customer of his career, he tore it open. The letterhead made him sit up straight. Sterling Royal Holdings International, office of the founder and chairman. His eyes scanned faster, stomach tightening with every line. "Russell, my name is Harlan Voss. I founded Sterling Royal Motors 31 years ago out of a single repair garage in Tulsa with $1,100 and a borrowed truck. I still own 100% of the holding company that owns the franchise license for every location in this country, including the one you manage. I don't often visit in person anymore. Today I decided to. I wore old clothes on purpose. I've done this periodically for over a decade. It's the only way I've ever learned what my company actually is, rather than what the quarterly reports tell me it is. Most of the time I leave disappointed in small ways. Today I'm leaving disappointed in a large one. I will return tomorrow morning at 10. Do not prepare a defense, rehearse an apology, or coach your staff on what to say. I have already seen what I needed to see. I will simply ask you to be there." H.V. Russell read it twice. A third time, hands faintly unsteady, the office suddenly colder than 30 seconds earlier. This was not a complaint letter. This was the end of something, and the only question left was how much of it he could still control. Russell didn't sleep that night. He told himself he wasn't panicking, that this was a man methodically managing a crisis, the way he'd managed every other crisis in 11 years of automotive retail. The truth underneath was simpler. A wife, a mortgage, 2 kids in private school, and a 6-figure salary that existed because a man named Harlan Voss had decided, in writing, that Russell deserved to run one of his stores. He called the regional VP, a man he'd golfed with twice and generously considered a professional acquaintance. "He's punking you," Carl said, not unkindly over a bad connection. "Voss hasn't set foot in a dealership in 4 years. This is some lunatic with a printer and a grudge." "It's on the actual letterhead, Carl, the seal. I've seen the seal on contracts. Letterhead can be faked, and if it's not," a long pause, "then God help you," Carl said and hung up. By midnight, Russell had landed on a strategy he genuinely believed in. Deny, soften, and where denial wasn't possible, frame. Over a decade in an industry built on managing perception rather than truth, and old instincts die hard at 1 in the morning. He thought back, almost against his will, to the old man's first steps onto the floor. He tried to remember what he'd actually seen, not what he'd assumed. A man who stood with the stillness of confidence, not poverty. Eyes that never wavered, hands that never fidgeted the way nervous peoples do. 11 years reading body language for sales cues. And if he was honest, which he very much did not want to be, none of it had actually said, "I don't belong here." He decided that before any of it registered based on denim and dust. And every read after had been built backward to justify the decision rather than inform it. He pushed the thought away. Easier to be angry at the situation than sit with that. He drafted 3 apologies, none containing the word fired, all containing misunderstanding, so many times it stopped looking like a word. He composed talking points for Trent. He drafted an internal memo, framing the whole thing as a training gap in situational customer service protocols, rather than what it actually was, which was 2 grown men mocking an old stranger for the crime of looking poor. His wife called near too, having woken to an empty bed. "You're still at the dealership, just finishing paperwork." The lie came automatically now. The way lies had started coming automatically over the last 6 years, without his ever quite noticing the shift. "Russell, it's 2 in the morning. I'll explain when I get home." He didn't go home at all, choosing instead to pace the empty showroom, drafting, rehearsing. As if proximity to the scene might let him control how the story ended. At 12:40, alone on the dark floor, he called Trent. "Listen carefully," he said, pacing past his own reflection in windows full of cars worth more than his childhood home. "Tomorrow, if anyone asks, we treated him with respect from the start, offered him water, discussed financing options appropriate to his needs. We never refused a test drive. We followed standard verification protocol that applies to every customer, regardless of appearance. Every customer." "That's the line." "That's not what happened," Trent said, uneasy, though Russell noted the unease was about getting caught, not about what they'd done. "Doesn't matter what happened. Matters what we can prove happened. No audio on the showroom cameras, just video. We stay consistent. It's our word against some old farmer nobody's heard of." He didn't know, standing alone in the dark with the cameras quietly recording every word. That someone else was still in the building. Daniela had stayed late finishing paperwork on a service intake that ran long, tucked into a back office with the door cracked for the crossbreeze. She heard Russell's voice before she saw him, low, urgent, pacing, and assumed at first he was on a mundane call, inventory numbers, a vendor dispute. Then standard verification protocol that applies to every customer. Her stomach went cold. She'd stood 20 feet away yesterday and watched Russell invent that exact phrase on the spot to excuse humiliating a man for wearing work boots in a building full of marble and chrome. She sat very still and listened to her general manager coach her coworker on how to lie. 23 years old, student loans. 4 months in, still on probation, still in the phase of employment where every HR video subtly teaches you that loyalty means silence. She understood exactly what this would cost her. She did it anyway. She waited until Russell's voice faded down the hallway and his door clicked shut, then slipped to an unused workstation and opened her email. No editorializing, no adjectives, no attempt to sound impressive, just the facts plainly. The time of the visit, the customer's appearance and demeanor, the exact words Russell and Trent used. The fabricated proof of funds policy invented in the moment, her own offer of water, the sealed envelope. And finally, hands shaking slightly as she typed it, what she'd just overheard Russell instructing Trent to say in the morning. She addressed it to the only thing in the directory that sounded senior enough. Corporate Integrity at Sterling Royal Holdings. COM. A compliance inbox she'd noticed once in an onboarding packet and never expected to use. She hit send at 1:14 a.m., closed the browser, and sat in the dark, half convinced she'd just ended her own career to protect the dignity of a stranger she'd probably never see again. She had no idea the stranger already owned the inbox she'd just emailed. Trent didn't sleep much either, for different reasons. He lay awake replaying the moment the old man asked for the test drive. And underneath his anxiety about getting caught was something he liked far less to examine directly, a memory of his own father, 30 years in a tire shop. Talked down to more times than Trent could count by men in suits who assumed a uniform, met a small mind. Trent had built his entire career, in some unexamined way, on becoming the man who did the talking down rather than the man who absorbed it. Lying awake at 2, he wasn't sure that trade had been worth what it cost him. He picked up his phone twice to call Russell back and refuse the script. Both times he set it down, telling himself he'd decide in the morning, which was its own kind of decision, the quiet, cowardly kind people make by running out the clock on having to choose. Harlan Voss read Daniella's email at 6:42 the next morning, sitting in the back of a black SUV idling outside a hotel 3 miles from the dealership, coffee going cold in the cup holder. His chief of staff, Priya Anand, 11 years on the job, long past being surprised by anything he did on his field trips, as the company privately called them, read it over his shoulder. She doesn't know who you are. No, Harlan agreed. She did it because it was true and because staying quiet would have meant building her whole career on top of a lie someone else told. People who do that at 23 are rare. I want her name in the file before we walk in there. He had also pulled the overnight security footage, a perk of owning the company that controlled the dealership's IT infrastructure, and watched. In silence, Russell pacing the dark floor at 12:40, gesturing with the specific, practiced energy of a man rehearsing a lie he intended to tell with confidence. He didn't need audio. He had Daniella's email time-stamped, matching the footage almost to the minute. There was something else in that footage Priya hadn't clocked yet, and Harlan hadn't mentioned, a detail he'd be sitting with all morning, turning it over the way he turned over old ledgers. Looking for the line that didn't add up. He said nothing about it yet. Confirm legal and the regional compliance officer are in the second vehicle, he said, setting the coffee down. Straightening cuffs that fit the way only properly tailored suits do, nothing like yesterday's faded shirt and dusty boots, though the face beneath them was exactly the same. Call ahead, tell them I'll be there at 10, not a minute before. I want Russell to have every second of this morning to think about what he's about to say to me. And Ashford, bring his personnel file. We'll decide his fate in the room, depending on how honestly he behaves once he understands the floor isn't his to control anymore. Priya glanced at Daniella's printed email. And her? Harlan was quiet a moment, watching the city wake up around them, traffic gathering, no idea what was about to happen 3 miles away. Her, he said finally, is the only reason I'm not shutting the whole location down today. At 9:58, Russell stood near the entrance, jacket buttoned. Hair combed flat with too much product, a printed apology folded twice in his breast pocket like a rosary carried into a courtroom. He'd told himself near 4 a.m. that if he performed remorse well enough, this would blow over the way every other corporate near-miss had blown over in his career. He believed in the most self-protective part of himself that charm could outrun truth, the way it always had before. Trent stood a few feet off, considerably paler, his tan doing very little to disguise the nerves underneath. He hadn't slept either. He'd also spent an hour the previous night quietly searching, Harlan Voss Sterling Royal on his phone. Finding old, grainy photos of a founder, with a well-documented habit of vanishing from public view for years at a stretch. The resemblance to the man in faded jeans had kept him up longer than Russell's coaching call had. At exactly 10, not 9, 59, not 10, 01, the kind of precision that told its own story about the man behind it. 3 black SUVs pulled into the circular drive, followed by a 4th. Priya stepped out first, then 2 members of corporate legal carrying tablets instead of briefcases, Then the regional compliance officer Russell had never met but recognized instantly by the badge. And finally, from the rear vehicle, Harlan Voss. Charcoal suit today, simply cut, no flash, the kind of expensive that doesn't announce itself to people who don't already know what they're looking at. Which Russell realized with a sinking, sickening clarity was exactly the principle the old man had tested on him yesterday in reverse. Wealth had never been the variable. Respect had been the test, and Russell had failed it in under 90 seconds. Harlan walked in unhurried, the same way he had the day before. Except the entire staff was already gathered near the service bay archway, summoned 20 minutes earlier by one ice-cold phone call from compliance, and every one of them was watching. Russell stepped forward, breathing through the speech in his pocket. "Mr. Voss, I want to say on behalf of the entire team how deeply sorry we—" "Don't." Quiet, not raised. The single word landed harder than any shout. "I told you in the letter not to rehearse anything. I meant it." Russell's mouth closed. The folded paper in his pocket suddenly felt enormous and useless. Harlan turned, taking in the showroom the way a man surveys land he's owned 30 years and is only now seeing clearly. "Yesterday I walked in here wearing old clothes because I wanted to know what this company actually is when nobody's watching for the cameras of a corporate audit. I know what we say we believe in our mission statement. I wanted to know what we actually do." He looked at Russell. "What I learned is that you decided within 90 seconds, based entirely on the state of a man's boots, that I wasn't worth basic courtesy. You invented a financial verification policy that doesn't exist anywhere in this company's actual handbook. I had it checked overnight. You told a 68-year-old man to take a cab to a pre-owned lot because you assumed he couldn't afford this building. He let it sit. Then last night at 12:40 in the morning, alone on this showroom floor, which has cameras synced to a server I personally have access to, you coached your top salesman on exactly what to tell me this morning. Standard verification protocol that applies to every customer. Your words, I have it on video." The floor seemed to tilt slightly under Russell, though nothing in the room had moved. "I also have an email," Harlan said, "sent at 1:14 this morning from someone in this building who watched what happened to me yesterday and decided the truth mattered more than her own job security. She didn't know who I was. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply refused to let a lie become the official record." He scanned the gathered staff until he found her near the back, half hidden, looking like she'd rather the floor swallow her than Russell. "Daniela, step forward." She did, slowly, flushed, genuinely unable to predict whether she was about to be fired or thanked. "Yesterday," Harlan said, addressing the room, "you were the only person in this building who treated a stranger like a human being before you knew what he was worth. You offered me water. You offered to find financing for a man you believed couldn't afford this car. Last night, when it would have been far easier to stay quiet and protect your probationary position, you told the truth in writing at 1 in the morning. To a compliance inbox you had no reason to think anyone important would ever read." A pause. "I read it within 6 hours." A murmur moved through the staff. Trent, near the front, had gone the color of the marble. "Effective today, Daniela Ruiz is promoted out of intake into a management training track, reporting directly to regional leadership. Full back pay adjusted to reflect the role. Integrity isn't something I've ever been able to put in a training manual. I'm not going to waste it on an intake desk." Daniela's hand came up to her mouth. Somewhere behind her, a junior mechanic started clapping, caught himself, stopped, though nobody seemed to mind. Harlan turned back to Russell. "You built a culture here where mocking a stranger felt safe and lying about it felt smart. Both end today. You're removed from your position as general manager, effective immediately." He let it land before continuing, tone never rising, never theatrical, just final. "You'll report to the detailing bay for 6 months, washing and prepping vehicles under whoever's appointed in your place. Full pay isn't guaranteed. Continued employment isn't either. That depends entirely on what I see from you over those 6 months. I want you to remember, every day with a hose in your hand, what the floor looked like from the position you put a 68-year-old man in yesterday." Russell opened his mouth to argue, to apologize again, to say something, and found, for the first time in his career, he had nothing. Then Trent moved, not after Harlan turned to him, before. He stepped forward on his own, voice unsteady but carrying. "Mr. Voss, before you decide anything on Russell. There's something you don't have on that footage." The room went very still. Even Priya's pen stopped moving. "That call last night, Russell didn't just script what to say. He told me, almost word for word, that if I didn't back the story, he'd make sure my numbers got flagged for review. That I'd lose my draw against commission. I'm not telling you this to get out of what I did. I laughed when he laughed yesterday. I went along with it on the floor. That's mine to own. But what happened after, that wasn't just a bad decision he talked me into. He threatened my paycheck to keep me quiet." Russell's head turned sharply. "That's not, I never said. You said it sitting in your office Tuesday before last, when I pushed back on the financing numbers for the Hendricks account," Trent said, not raising his voice. "Not enjoying it, just laying it down. I didn't think anything of it then. I thought that was just how you managed people. I think different now." Harlan didn't react with surprise. He'd been holding something back since the SUV, the detail in the footage that hadn't added up. A phone call from 3 weeks earlier, flagged in routine financial audits, that he hadn't yet connected to anything. Trent had just handed him the missing piece. "That," Harlan said slowly, "changes the math considerably." He looked at Russell. And for the first time, something colder moved behind his eyes. Not the disappointment of a man who'd caught bad customer service, but the recognition of a pattern he should have caught sooner. "Coercion of an employee to protect yourself isn't a training gap, Russell. It's the reason I started doing these visits in the first place. 11 years ago, before I owned a single location outright, a man much like you told my own son he'd lose his job if he didn't falsify a delivery log. My son was 19. He did what he was told because he was scared, the same way Trent was scared last night. I bought that company 2 years later and fired the man myself. I've been checking for him in every store I own ever since." "I never knew that," Priya said quietly, almost to herself. Surprised that 11 years in this man's office hadn't surfaced that story before. "I don't tell it often," Harlan said. "It's not a story I'm proud of needing. A company shouldn't need a founder dressing up in old boots to find out whether it's treating people decently. But apparently it does every few years in every business large enough to forget who it's actually for." He looked back at Russell. "My son left the auto industry entirely after that. Wouldn't go near a dealership floor for a decade. He's fine now, better than fine. But I've spent every year since trying to make sure nobody else's kid, or nobody's father, or nobody at all walks out of one of my stores carrying what he carried out of that one." Russell stared at him, the apology in his pocket now meaningless, the silence of the room pressing in from every side. "The detailing bay offer is withdrawn," Harlan said. "You're terminated effective immediately, with cause, and HR will be in touch regarding the coercion claims separately from anything related to yesterday. What you did to me with the boots and the dust, that was arrogance. What you did to him with his paycheck, that's something I don't leave running a register, let alone a dealership." He turned to Trent. "You came forward before I asked. Before you knew which way Russell's punishment was going to land, and before you knew it would help you. That's different from confessing once you're already caught." He studied him a long moment. "Probation stands, 90 days, same condition as before, judge a customer by their clothes again, and there's no second warning. But I'm adding a second condition. You're going to be the one who trains every new hire in this store on exactly what happened this week, including your own part in it. Not Daniella's version. Yours." Said out loud to a room more than once, "That's harder than 6 months with a hose." The weeks that followed reshaped Sterling Royal Motors in ways no corporate memo could have manufactured. Daniella stepped into her new role with the nervous energy of someone promoted faster than she'd ever imagined, rebuilding the floor culture not through speeches, but through small, consistent example, the same instinct that had made her offer a stranger water without knowing what it would cost or earn her. New hires noticed it before anyone explained it to them. Nobody on this floor prejudged a customer's wallet before their name. Russell did not return to the building, not even to collect the last of his things. He had them shipped. 3 weeks after his termination, an HR investigation, prompted by Trent's account on the floor that morning, confirmed 2 other employees had quietly experienced the same kind of pressure. Vague threats tied to commission, draw against pay scheduling. Neither had reported it. Both cited the same fear Trent had described, the particular, paralyzing fear of a person who needs the job more than they need to be right. Harlan had the company-wide policy rewritten within the month. Any manager found leveraging compensation to silence an employee would be terminated on the spot. No review period, no second chances. Language specific enough that legal had pushed back twice and lost both times. Russell eventually found work at a smaller, independent lot 2 towns over. The kind of place with no glass towers and no track lighting, just a gravel lot and an owner who did his own books. People who'd worked under him at Sterling Royal heard, secondhand, that he was quieter there. Whether that was humility or just exhaustion, nobody who told the story seemed entirely sure, and Daniela, when asked, would only say she hoped it was the first one. Trent gave his first training talk on a Tuesday afternoon, voice shaking through the first 2 minutes before steadying. He didn't soften his own part in it. He told the new hires exactly what he'd done on the floor, exactly why he'd almost stayed quiet about what came after, and exactly what it had cost him to speak up half a second before he knew it would help rather than hurt him. It became, over time, the most requested session in the regional onboarding program, not because it was polished, but because it wasn't, and people could tell the difference. A year in, he was the one who pulled new sales hires aside before their first shift and told them plainly that the floor remembers who you were to people before you knew their balance sheet. On a Friday afternoon in early autumn, Harlan summoned Daniela to Sterling Royal Holdings headquarters. A glass tower 40 stories above the city she'd seen from the street 100 times and never once imagined entering. The elevator alone took longer than her entire commute most mornings. She rehearsed 3 different opening lines on the way up, and forgot all of them the moment the doors opened onto a floor quieter than any showroom she'd ever worked. He met her standing at the window, looking down at traffic the way he so often looked at the people who made up his company from a vantage point most of them never saw him occupy. "I want you to run the company's philanthropic foundation," he said, without much preamble. Preamble had never been his style. Education access, vocational training, scholarships for kids who look exactly like you did at 23 with student loans and no safety net. Significant promotion. Significant resources. One expectation only. What's that? That you never let the title change what made you worth promoting in the first place. He handed her a folded note, plain paper, unhurried handwriting. "Read it later." "Not now." She nearly asked him why her, out of everyone in the company, but stopped herself. Because she already knew the answer, and suspected he'd think less of her for needing to hear it said aloud. She read it that night, alone in her apartment, the city lights outside her window nothing like the view from his office 40 stories up. Daniela, integrity is easy when no one's watching and costs you nothing. It's rare and worth building a company around, only when it costs you something and you do it anyway. You did that on an ordinary Tuesday night for a stranger you had no reason to protect. Never let the climb make you forget what the floor looks like. The showroom at dusk looked nothing like the cold, judgmental room it had been 6 months earlier. Lights glowing warm, floor quiet and orderly. A place that had finally caught up to what it claimed to be. If this story moved